Dramatic dashcam video out of upstate New York where a crash caused a massive pileup. You can see a truck.
There are parts of the car that are scattered all across the road here. And look at that landscaping truck. That seems to be the center in the...
The moment Samuel's heart stopped, time shattered. 1 second, he was a fever-racked Amish boy gasping for air. The next, he was floating above his own lifeless body, watching his mother sob over his still chest. Then came the light, the voice, the visions of a world on fire. When he woke screaming 3 days later, he carried a message no one wanted to hear. The end was coming, and everything they believed about it was wrong. I was born into an Amish family in a small farming community where life moved at the pace of horse hooves on dirt roads. From the time I could walk, I learned that faith was not just something we talked about on Sundays. It was woven into every chore, every meal, every quiet moment. We lived simply, without electricity or cars, and that was how it had always been. The outside world was a distant thing, something we were taught to view with caution. My parents were strict but kind. My father believed hard work kept the soul clean, and my mother taught me that obedience was the highest form of love. I didn't question much as a child. Why would I? The rules were clear. Obey the ordinance, trust in God's will, and never stray from the path. But as I grew older, small cracks began to form in that certainty. I remember the first time I truly doubted. I was 12, and a group of Englisher boys passed by in a truck, laughing and shouting as their music blared. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to ride in such a thing, to go fast, to hear songs that weren't hymns. The thought alone felt like a sin. That night, I prayed for forgiveness, but the questions didn't stop. What if there was more to life than plowing fields and kneeling in prayer? What if God's voice wasn't only in the silence of our church, but somewhere beyond our fences? I never spoke these thoughts aloud. To question was to risk shame, or worse, being shunned. So I buried my curiosity deep and tried to focus on being a good Amish boy. But the restlessness stayed, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my obedience. Then came the day everything changed. It was late autumn, the air sharp with the coming winter. I was helping my father bring in the last of the harvest when the fever hit. At first, it was just a chill, something I brushed off. But by nightfall, my skin burned like fire, and my breath came in short, painful gasps. My mother pressed cold cloths to my forehead. Her prayers whispered into the dark. The doctor came, but his face was grim. "It's moving fast," he said. I remember the fear in my parents' eyes, the way my little sister clutched my hand too tight. Then the world began to fade, the room tilting like a buggy on a steep hill. The last thing I heard was my mother's voice, begging God not to take me. And then, nothing. The fever had taken over completely. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. It was just pain and heat and weakness all at once. I remember trying to take a breath, but my lungs wouldn't obey. My mother's face hovered above me, her mouth moving, but no sound reaching me. The kerosene lamp in the corner flickered strangely, its light stretching and bending like it was underwater. Then came the most peculiar sensation, like someone had grabbed the back of my shirt collar and was gently pulling me upright, except I was already lying down. When I looked, I saw something impossible, my own body still on the bed, pale and still, with my family gathered around crying. My little sister Ruth was shaking my shoulder, but I wasn't there anymore. I floated near the ceiling, watching it all unfold beneath me. The doctor placed his fingers against my neck, then shook his head slowly. My father's strong shoulders slumped like a broken fence post. Mother collapsed onto my chest, her prayer cap slipping sideways as she sobbed. At first, I thought this must be a dream, but everything was too clear. The rough texture of the wool blankets, the smell of the chicken soup cooling untouched on the nightstand, the way the shadows danced on the wall. I could even hear the cows lowing in the barn outside, though no one else seemed to notice them anymore. Am I dead? The question formed in my mind, but I had no mouth to speak it. I reached toward my mother, but my hand passed right through her shoulder. That's when the panic set in. If I was dead, why could I still see and hear everything? Why wasn't I with God? The preachers always said death was either heaven or hell, not this strange in-between place. Below me, the doctor closed my eyes and pulled the sheet up. My family began singing a funeral hymn in shaky voices. I wanted to scream that I was right here, that I could see them, but no sound came. Then something even stranger happened. A warm light began filling the far corner of the room, and I felt myself being drawn toward it against my will. The light from the bedroom vanished as suddenly as a candle snuffed out. I found myself in complete darkness, not the comforting dark of a moonless night in my loft bed, but a thick, endless blackness that seemed to press against me from all sides. There was no ground beneath my feet, no sky above, just nothingness stretching in every direction. At first I tried to walk, but my legs moved through empty air. I reached out my hands, grasping for anything solid, but touched only emptiness. The silence was worse than the dark. No birdsong, no wind, not even the sound of my own breathing. I called out for my parents, for God, but my voice made no sound in his place. Fear crawled up my throat like a living thing. Was this hell? Had I been wrong about everything? The ministers always said disobedience led to damnation, but I tried so hard to be good. Maybe my secret thoughts about the outside world had condemned me. Maybe wondering about cars and radios had been enough to anger God. Why am I alone? The question echoed in my mind. In Sunday sermons, death was described as either angels coming to carry you to heaven or demons dragging you to punishment. But no one came for me. Had God forgotten me? Was I too unimportant even for hell? Time meant nothing here. It could have been minutes or years. There was no way to tell. I started remembering every wrong thing I'd ever done. The time I lied about breaking the milk pail, the day I hid in the hayloft to avoid chores, all those sinful thoughts about the English world. Maybe this emptiness was my punishment, not fire and brimstone, but complete abandonment. Then came the worst thought of all. What if there was no God at all? What if the Amish way was just stories made up to keep children obedient? The darkness seemed to pulse with this terrible idea, pressing closer. I curled in myself, wishing I could disappear completely. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it another moment, I saw something. The faintest glow in the distance, like the first hint of dawn through a barn window. At first I feared it was my imagination, but it grew steadily brighter. Warmth radiated from it, cutting through the chill that had settled in my bones. The light didn't hurt my eyes like the noonday sun. It was soft and welcoming, and as it drew nearer, the heavy darkness around me began to thin. I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fever. Hope. Maybe I wasn't forgotten after all. Maybe this light was coming for me. Without knowing how, I began moving toward it. There was still no ground beneath me, but I glided forward as effortlessly as a leaf caught in a gentle current. The closer I got, the lighter I felt, as if the fear and doubt were being peeled away layer by layer. Then, from within the light, a voice spoke, not out loud, but directly into my heart. It said only 2 words. Be not afraid. And in that moment, though I still didn't understand where I was or what was happening, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The light grew until it filled everything, but unlike the harsh sun, it didn't blind me. It felt like being wrapped in warmth. Then he was there. I knew him instantly, though I'd never seen his face before. Jesus stood before me, not like the solemn figure in our church's old German Bible, but alive, so alive that everything else seemed dull in comparison. His eyes held depths I couldn't fathom, yet when he looked at me, I didn't feel afraid. I felt known, truly known, in ways even I didn't know myself. He wore simple clothing, no ornate robes, nothing to separate him from the humblest Amish farmer. But his presence, it hummed with a quiet power, like the air before a summer storm. When he smiled, it reached his eyes first, and I felt something inside me break open. You are not forgotten, he said. Those words washed over me like cool water on a scorching day. All the fear, the loneliness, the doubt, it melted away. I wanted to fall to my knees, but there was no ground. Instead, I simply was, held in that moment, in the safety of his gaze. Then, without warning, my life began unfolding around us, not like pictures in a book, but as if I were living each moment again. I saw myself as a small boy, sharing my bread with a stray dog behind the barn. I felt again the warmth of that simple kindness. But then came the harder moments, the time I laughed when Jacob Yoder tripped in the mud, the day I lied to my mother about where I'd been. I cringed, waiting for punishment, but Jesus simply watched with me. His hand rested on my shoulder, not in judgment, but in understanding. You see only your mistakes, he said. I see your heart. One scene stood out, a memory I'd nearly forgotten. Last winter, when the roads were icy, I'd stayed late to help Bishop Miller's elderly wife carry her firewood. It had been cold and my fingers numb, but I remembered how she'd patted my cheek with her wrinkled hand and said, "The Lord sees your kindness, Samuel." Now, standing beside Jesus, I realized he had seen it. Not just that moment, but every quiet act of love. The times I'd held Ruth's hand when she was scared of thunderstorms, the way I'd once given my new scarf to a shivering beggar at the market. Things no one else had noticed. Things I hadn't even thought mattered. But they did. The life review shifted, showing me something new. Not my past, but glimpses of how those small choices had rippled outward. The beggar had shared my scarf with a sick child. The stray dog I fed had later alerted a family to a barn fire. My kindnesses, tiny as they seemed, had mattered in ways I'd never imagined. Then came the hardest part. I saw myself sitting on the fence last summer, watching an English boy ride by on a bicycle, his laughter floating on the wind. I'd felt such longing in that moment, not for the bike, but for the freedom of it. The shame I'd carried since then rose up like bile, but Jesus simply tilted his head. Curiosity is not sin, Samuel. I made the world, all of it. Your questions don't frighten me. The weight that lifted from my chest then was more than I could describe. For the first time, I understood what grace truly meant. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being loved, completely, unconditionally, even when I fell short. As the last of the visions faded, Jesus took both my hands in his. His palms were rough, like a carpenter's, like my father's. "Now you must see what is coming," he said. "Not to frighten you, but to prepare you." And with those words, the light around us changed, showing me things that would haunt and amaze me in equal measure. Visions of the end times unlike anything the preachers had ever described. The light around Jesus shimmered like heat rising from summer fields, and suddenly I was seeing things no Amish boy from our community could imagine. Visions flashed before me, not like dreams, but real as the calluses on my hands. I saw cities burning. Not just one, but many, their skyscrapers crumbling like children's blocks. The air smelled of smoke and something worse than the metallic tank of fear. People ran through streets clutching worthless money, their faces streaked with ash and tears. I wanted to look away, but Jesus held my gaze. "Watch," he said gently. Next came the waters. Rivers burst their banks, swallowing homes whole. The ocean rose up like an angry beast, claiming entire islands. I saw mothers clutching babies, wading through chest-high water, their pleas for help lost in the roaring wind. Then came the wars. Not like the history books showed, with neat battle lines and uniforms. These were chaotic, neighbor against neighbor, fought with weapons I didn't recognize. The worst part wasn't the violence. It was the eyes of the soldiers. Empty. Hopeless. Like they'd forgotten they were human. I turned to Jesus, my stomach churning. Is this God's punishment? The question slipped out before I could stop it. His answer surprised me. "No, Samuel. This is what happens when mankind forgets me. These are the consequences of greed, of hatred, of worshiping progress over people." His voice carried no anger, only sorrow deeper than any I'd known. The earth groans under the weight of sin, and this is its cry. The scene changed again. Now I saw our Amish community, but changed. Some families had fortified their farms with strange devices. Others argued bitterly over supplies. A few elders stood preaching doom on every corner, their faces alight with something that wasn't holy. It was excitement. They enjoyed the fear they created. "Many will use my name to control," Jesus warned. "They will point to these events as proof they were right. But love never controls, Samuel. Love prepares differently." He showed me another path. Our community sharing meals with hungry Englishers. Women stitching blankets together while children played nearby. Men helping rebuild a burnt church, their sleeves rolled up in simple brotherhood. The peace in this scene was so tangible I could almost touch it. The end times are not about surviving longer than others. Jesus explained. They're about becoming more like me. The disasters will come, yes. But they're not the end. They're the birth pains of something new. I watched as faithful people of all kinds, not just Amish, carried light into dark places. They didn't hoard food or weapons. They shared what they had and trusted God for tomorrow. Their homes became places of refuge not because of stocked pantries, but because of the love that lived there. Then came the hardest vision. I saw myself standing before our congregation sharing these warnings. Some listened, many scoffed. A few turned away angrily. The rejection stung, but Jesus squeezed my shoulder. Truth often comes through unlikely voices. Speak anyway. He showed me one last thing. A world renewed, the scorched earth greening again, children laughing in clean rivers, people from every nation breaking bread together, their faces radiant with a joy I had never seen before. The air itself seemed to hum with peace. This is what comes after, Jesus said. The purification has a purpose, Samuel. Like fire cleanses a field before planting, these trials will prepare the earth for its true harvest. The vision faded, leaving us back in that sea of light. My mind spun with questions, but one burned brightest. How do we prepare? Jesus smiled, and in that moment I understood more clearly than any sermon had ever taught me. Store up treasure, yes, but not in barns. Store it in heaven through acts of love. When the hungry come to your door, feed them. When the frightened need shelter, take them in. This is how my people weather every storm. He cupped my face in his hands, and I felt the scars there. Remember this above all. The times will grow dark, but my light in you must shine brighter. Not through loud preaching, but through quiet obedience. Not through fear, but through love so radical it confuses the world. As he spoke these words, they etched themselves into my spirit. I knew they would guide me for the rest of my days, however many, or few, those might be. The warmth of Jesus' hand still lingered on my face as he spoke again. Samuel, I'm sending you back. His words hung in the air between us, and for the first time since arriving in this place, I felt a new kind of fear, the fear of returning. Back? My voice sounded small, childlike. But I want to stay here, with you. The thought of leaving this perfect love, this complete understanding, made my spirit ache. Jesus nodded, his eyes holding infinite compassion. I know, little one, but your work isn't finished. He gestured toward the fading visions of earth. They need to hear this message, not from preachers looking for signs, but from a simple heart like yours. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had milked cows and mended fences. But I'm just a boy, I protested. The elders won't listen. My own father might not believe me. The weight of what he was asking settled on me like a heavy winter cloak. Jesus lifted my chin with one finger. Did Moses not say he was slow of speech? Did David not seem too small to fight Goliath? His voice carried the gentleness of a spring breeze through the cornfields. I don't call the equipped, Samuel. I equip the called. The truth of his words resonated deep in my soul, yet still I hesitated. What if I fail? What if I'm too afraid to speak? At this, Jesus smiled, a smile that held all the patience in creation. Then start small. Tell Ruth first, then your mother. Let the message grow as your courage does. He placed his hand over my heart. I'll be here, reminding you when you forget. In that moment, I understood this wasn't about grand speeches or convincing the whole community at once. It was about obedience in small things first, the same way we planted seeds one by one in the spring, trusting God for the harvest. I took a deep breath, or what felt like one in this place without air. I'll go back, I whispered. Then stronger, I'll tell them, even if they don't listen at first. Jesus embraced me then, and in that hug, I felt all the strength I would need for the journey ahead. Remember, he said as he pulled away, it's not your job to convince them, only to tell them. The rest is between them and me. The light around us began to shift, and I knew my time here was ending. One last look into those endless eyes, and then everything faded to white. A searing pain shot through my chest as if someone had plunged me into icy water. My lungs burned as they jerked in emotion, dragging in a ragged breath that sounded unnaturally loud in my ears. The scent of medicinal herbs and sweat filled my nose, so different from the pure air where I'd just been. Samuel. My mother's voice cracked with emotion as her face swam into view above me, her prayer cap crooked and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Behind her, my father stood frozen, his work-roughened hands suspended in midair as if afraid to touch me. The doctor's mouth hung open, his stethoscope dangling uselessly from his neck. Everything hurt. My throat felt scraped raw, my muscles trembled like a newborn calf's, and a terrible thirst clawed at me. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing weight of being back in my body, like being stuffed into a too-small shirt that used to fit perfectly. Water, I croaked, and the sound of my own voice startled me. It sounded different somehow, deeper, older. Chaos erupted. Ruth came barreling into the room, her small body colliding with mine as she sobbed in my nightshirt. The doctor began barking orders while checking my pulse with shaking fingers. Through the open door, I saw neighbors crowding the porch, their faces a mix of awe and suspicion. As the initial shock faded, I noticed strange things about my body. The fever that had nearly killed me was gone completely. Not even a trace of warmth remained in my forehead when Mother checked. My vision was sharper somehow, the colors more vibrant than I remembered. But when I tried to sit up, weakness washed over me, reminding me I still had a long recovery ahead. The doctor kept muttering about medical anomalies as he examined me. His lungs sound completely clear, he told my parents in a hushed tone. There's no sign of infection at all. It's not possible after how far the sickness had progressed. That first evening, as the lanterns were lit and the house grew quiet, my family gathered around my bed. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air between us. I knew what they wanted to ask, what they were afraid to voice. Taking a deep breath, I broke the silence. I died. My voice sounded steadier now. I saw Jesus. He showed me things about the end times. Mother's hands flew to her mouth. Father's brow furrowed deeply, but he didn't interrupt. Little Ruth just stared at me with wide, trusting eyes. He said, I hesitated, suddenly unsure how to explain visions of burning cities and rising waters to people who'd never seen an elevator, let alone a skyscraper. He said hard times are coming, but we shouldn't be afraid. We need to prepare our hearts, not our barns. The words sounded foolish even as I said them. What did an Amish farm boy know about the end of the world? Yet, the truth burned inside me with the same certainty as sunrise after a long night. Father finally spoke, his voice carefully neutral. We'll speak with the bishop tomorrow. There was no disapproval in his tone, but no belief either, just cautious concern for a son who'd been deathly ill. As they left me to rest, I stared at the familiar cracks in the ceiling above my bed. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. How could I explain that I'd touched the face of God? That I carried warnings too big for my small shoulders? The weight of my mission settled over me as the candle flickered shadows across the walls, the first whispers of a calling that would change everything. The bishop's kitchen smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee when we arrived the next morning. The elders sat around the long wooden table, their bearded faces stirred in the flickering lamplight. I kept my eyes on my boots as Father explained what had happened. My fever, the moment the doctor declared me gone, and my sudden return with a story they wouldn't want to hear. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook. I told them about the light, about Jesus, about the visions of what was coming. The words tumbled out in a rush, sounding stranger the longer I talked. The room grew so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Bishop Miller leaned forward, his work-worn hands folded on the table. Samuel, he said slowly, we thank God for sparing your life. But dreams are not doctrine. His voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm, the same tone he used when correcting wayward boys. The Ordnung teaches us to be humble, not to claim special visions. One of the other elders, Uncle Eli, shifted in his seat. The boy was sick with fever, he muttered. The mind plays tricks when the body suffers. I wanted to argue, to tell them I hadn't been dreaming, that I'd been more awake in that light than I'd ever been in my life. But the weight of their doubt pressed down on me. Who was I, a 15-year-old boy, to challenge men who had studied scripture for decades? At home, the division grew worse. Mother watched me with new worry, as if waiting for me to collapse again, or say something else that might get me shunned. Ruth believed every word, her childlike faith untouched by doubt. But Father wouldn't meet my eyes. The community's whispers started within days. At church, the women stopped asking Mother how I was recovering. The boys I'd grown up with suddenly found chores to do whenever I approached. Even kind old Martha Baylor, who always saved me an extra whoopie pie at gatherings, pressed one in my hand with a pitying look before walking away quickly. Worst of all was the preaching. That Sunday, Bishop Miller gave a sermon on 2 Timothy, his voice booming about itching ears and those who heap up teachers to suit their own passions. He never said my name, but his eyes found me more than once. By harvest time, I'd learned to keep quiet. When neighbors asked how I was, I gave the expected answers. When the children begged me to tell the story of when you died, I shook my head and changed the subject. But at night, lying awake in the loft, I'd press my hands to my chest and remember the light, the love, the urgency of the message burning inside me like banked coals. The isolation should have made me doubt my own experience. Instead, It made me understand something Jesus had shown me, but I hadn't grasped until now. The hardest trials wouldn't be the wars or disasters coming to the world. They'd be the quiet ones. The loneliness of being believed by no one except the God who'd sent you. Winter came early that year, the first snow dusting the fields before Thanksgiving. The cold seeped into our bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled between me and the community. I did my chores in silence, ate my meals with downcast eyes, and lay awake each night wrestling with what I'd seen. Jesus had told me to share the message, but every time I opened my mouth to speak, fear clamped it shut. The risk was too great. If I kept pushing, I might lose everything. My family, my place in the community, the only life I'd ever known. Yet when I stayed silent, the words burned in my chest like swallowed fire. The first confirmation came in a dream. Not a vision like before, but clear enough to startle me awake. I saw our barn engulfed in flames, the beams collapsing one by one. 3 days later, lightning struck the miller's barn across the valley. When we arrived to help put out the fire, I saw the same pattern of falling beams from my dream. No one else noticed, but I couldn't unsee it. Then came the Englisher woman at the farmer's market. I was selling mother's quilts when she stopped at our booth, her eyes locking onto mine with unsettling intensity. "You've seen the other side," she said matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. Before I could respond, she pressed a folded note into my hand and disappeared into the crowd. The paper contained a single Bible verse. "Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it." Habakkuk 2:2. These small signs kept the embers of my calling alive, but the real turning point came with Dr. Reynolds. The English doctor who'd pronounced me dead returned to check on me one snowy January morning. While Mother prepared tea in the kitchen, he examined me with quiet amazement. "Medically, you shouldn't be here," he admitted, stethoscope against my back. "Your lungs were completely filled when I last saw you." Something about his scientific curiosity made the words spill out. I told him everything: the light, the life review, the visions of coming disasters. To my shock, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He simply listened, his sharp doctor's eyes missing nothing. When I finished, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "I've heard similar stories from patients who coded on my operating table," he said. "Different details, but the same feeling about it." He met my gaze squarely. "I don't know what you experienced, Samuel, but I know it changed you. The question is, what will you do with that?" His words struck me like a physical blow. For the first time, someone outside our insular world had not only believed me, but challenged me to act. That night, I crept down to the barn with paper and a pencil I'd borrowed from the schoolhouse. By lantern light, I began writing, not in German like our scriptures, but in English, so others beyond our community might understand. The words flowed faster than my clumsy hand could write. Descriptions of the cities in flames, the rising waters, the way communities would turn on each other. But most of all, I wrote about the love I felt, how it was the only true preparation for what was coming. When the rooster crowed at dawn, I had 12 pages filled. My fingers were stiff with cold, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I hid the papers under a loose floorboard in the hayloft, knowing this was just the beginning. Dr. Reynolds had shown me something crucial. Perhaps God didn't intend this message just for the Amish. Perhaps the very people we've been taught to avoid, the Englishers with their technology and noise, needed to hear it most of all. The thought terrified me. But for the first time since returning from death, I felt the faintest stirring of peace. The morning after writing those pages, I carried the secret of them in my chest like a second heartbeat. As I milked the cows, their warm breath fogging in a cold barn, the realization settled over me: this message wasn't meant to stay hidden in our community. The visions Jesus showed me hadn't been of Amish farms alone. They'd been of cities and nations, of all kinds of people facing what was coming. The thought should have frightened me more than it did. We'd always been taught to stay separate, to keep the world at arm's length. But if what I'd seen was true, then the divisions we cherished, Amish and English, plain and fancy, would mean nothing when the storms came. What would matter was who had learned to love. I remembered something Jesus had told me that I hadn't fully understood at the time. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Back then, I'd pictured literal wheat fields. Now I saw the truth. The harvest was hearts, and they were everywhere, not just in our church district. This changed everything. I couldn't just whisper warnings to those who already believed like we did. The message wasn't about becoming Amish. It was about becoming Christ-like, no matter what life you came from. That Sunday, as we sat through another sermon about staying separate from the world. The words burned inside me. Love, not fear, prepares us for the end. Not rules. Not stockpiles. Not even traditions. Just love, the kind that feeds strangers and prays for enemies and shares the last loaf of bread. I looked around at the familiar faces in the congregation, the very people who now kept their distance from me, and understood with sudden clarity. My first mission field wasn't out there among the English. It was right here, in this room, with these people I loved. If I couldn't show them what Christ-like love looked like, how could I expect anyone else to believe me? The calling settled over me, quiet but unshakable. I would live the message first. Then, when the time was right, I would share it, not just in our community, but with anyone willing to listen. The bishop's closing prayer echoed through the silent church. Lord, keep us faithful until the end. I bowed my head and added my own silent plea, and show us what faithfulness really looks like. The shunning began in small ways. The way the men stopped including me in barn raisings, how the women no longer asked me to hold their babies during church. At school, the teacher kept me after lessons one day, his voice low but firm. These stories you're telling the younger children, Samuel, they must stop. But the hardest moment came when my own cousins crossed the road to avoid walking beside me. Their rejection stung more than any winter wind. Yet in that loneliness, unexpected allies appeared. Old Martha Baylor began leaving jars of her famous raspberry jam on our porch with notes quoting scripture. Young Bendel, just 14 but wise beyond his years, sought me out after chores to ask quiet questions about my experience. And to my shock, Bishop Miller's wife slipped me a folded handkerchief one Sunday. Inside was a scrap of paper with a single word: persevere. The miracles started small too. When little Miriam Stoltzfus burned her hand on the cook stove, I found myself praying over the blistering skin without thinking. By next morning, the angry red marks had faded to nothing. Miriam told everyone, and though the adults shook their heads, the children watched me with new wonder. Then came the drought. All spring, the men had debated whether to irrigate, but I kept hearing the same words in my prayers. Wait, the rain will come. Against all wisdom, I told my father we shouldn't waste money on hoses. He frowned but listened. 2 days later, storms rolled in, not just showers, but 3 days of steady, soaking rain that saved the crops. Even my father couldn't deny the timing. As the seasons passed, I noticed a change within myself. Where I'd once dreaded the visions of coming disasters, now I faced them with a strange calm. The future no longer terrified me because I had glimpsed what lay beyond it. The renewed earth, the faces shining with joy. This peace baffled those around me. When word came of wars overseas or storms destroying cities, while others panicked, I found myself kneeling in the potato rows, praying not for escape, but for courage to love well through whatever came. One evening, as I helped Benuel mend a fence, he asked a question I sensed he'd been holding for months. Aren't you afraid of what's coming? I paused, the hammer heavy in my hand. I used to be, I admitted. But now I know the ending. The storms will rage, yes, but they'll pass. And when they do, I gesture to the sunset painting the fields gold. What comes after will make all this beauty look like a faded photograph. Benuel studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. I want to believe like that, he murmured. As I walked home that night, fireflies dancing in the gathering dark, I realized this was the true miracle, not the healings or the foreknowledge, but this unshakable certainty that no matter how dark the world became, the light I'd met would never be overcome. And that was a truth worth living, no matter the cost. If there's one thing I learned from my journey beyond death, it's this: when the storms come, and they will come, what matters most won't be what we believed, but how we loved. Jesus showed me churches that stood empty while their members hid behind locked doors, and simple homes where one candle of kindness lit up entire neighborhoods. The end times won't test our doctrines. They'll test our hearts. People ask me what they should store up for what's coming. I tell them what I saw. The families who survived with least were those who'd practiced giving while they still had plenty. Not just food or blankets, but forgiveness. Patience. The willingness to see Christ in the face of a stranger. These are the supplies that never run out. I've stopped trying to convince anyone with fancy arguments. The plain truth is enough. God isn't calling us to build bunkers, but to break down walls. When the Englisher family's barn burned last winter, our community could have said, "They're not Amish. Let their own people help." Instead, we showed up with hammers and saws. That day, I saw more of Christ in the calloused hands of our men than in all the sermons I've ever heard. The path forward is simpler than we make it. Not easy, simple. Wake each morning and ask, "Who needs your love today, Lord?" Then go be that love, whether it's holding a crying child or helping an enemy rebuild. The more we practice this now, the more natural it will be when true crisis comes. Some say I'm foolish to trust so completely. They point to the world's darkness and say, "See, everything's getting worse." But I saw beyond the darkness. I stood in a field where children of every color played together, where the air itself shimmered with joy. That future is as real as the ground beneath our feet, more real, because it's eternal. So, this is my final word, whether you're Amish, English, or anyone else. Don't let fear steal your today while you worry about tomorrow. The God who walked with me through death walks with you now in life. He knows your doubts, your secret wounds, the ways you've failed. And He loves you, not someday when you're better, but right now, exactly as you are. When my time comes to cross over again, I won't go trembling like before. I've seen the other side. I know the hands that will greet me. Until then, I'll keep planting seeds, both in the earth and in human hearts, trusting that the same sun and rain that grow our crops will nurture what's been sown. The world may grow dark, friends, but we were made to shine. So let's stop arguing about who's right and start proving what's right by how we live. The harvest is coming. Let's make sure we're ready, not with full barns, but with fuller hearts. After all, I'm just an Amish boy who died and came back. But if God could use someone like me, imagine what He might do with you.